Hey there guys, it's Metro, and today I am back with my main man Cop yet again in this series. We've been away from it for a while. We did all the dungeons, we did all these other various topics. I've been doing reviews on my own, but we wanted to make this video a long time ago. Honestly, I kind of just forgot, but Cop reminded me today. So we're back. What are we talking about today, Cop?
We're talking about affixes.
Yeah, it's been a long time coming. This is a topic that we maybe should have started with, frankly, because
Yeah.
you could talk about the individual dungeons, but affixes are the core of Mythic Plus, and they're what makes it hard. If you don't have any affixes at all, you'd really be doing dungeons that are maybe like 5 or 6 times higher, or 5 or 6 levels higher than what you're doing right now, because the affixes slow you down, they complicate the pulls, they complicate the dungeons in a severe way. So this is going to be a light overview of the video. I'm going to focus more on what Cop knows to help him, and hopefully we could learn from that, because we've been doing these review videos, and I feel like the best thing about those is that I could see what the other person knows and doesn't know, and I could comment on that. So we're going to take that approach for this video as well. I could talk about affixes till I'm blue in the face. I know pretty much everything there is to know about them, but that might not necessarily help you understand what you don't know about them. So that's where we're going to start. Anything you want to say before we do start, Cop?
Nah, not really. There's stuff that again I'm not 100% certain on, but this is going to be really, really good for me. Definitely.
So I have this document on the screen. It's actually, I'll show real quick, just this is the routes document as well. I use the same document that I made when I did the routes video. If you haven't seen the routes video, it's in the playlist that this video is part of. But otherwise, yeah, it's just going to be one document. Maybe I'll even add more things to the future. And again, if you're not watching this in Battle for Azeroth, there's a really good chance that these are all going to change in 9.0. In fact, almost assuredly, because they called it the Great Affix Revisit. So a lot of this is probably going to be outdated. We'll make a new video in the future if that happens. But yeah, this is where we're at right now, at least for probably at least another 6 some months, maybe more like 8 or 10. So let's get right into it. So affixes are broken down into 3 levels. There's also the seasonal affix, which I'm not going to talk about in this video. Frankly, the seasonal affix is its own topic entirely, and that's really just kind of falls in the routes video because of how it works. So if you have any questions about that, we could talk about that another time, but we're just going to talk about the actual affixes that are core to Mythic Plus regardless of level. And starting with level 4 affixes. Okay, so there's 5 level 4 affixes, and how it works is a level 4 affix will appear, a level 7 affix will appear, and then the level 2 affix now, that's just there always. Any key is always going to have either fortified or tyrannical to kind of make the weak a little bit more unique. But they can't ever, like, you'll never have bolstering and raging on one week, right? They're both level 4 affixes. So this is something that maybe people don't realize. And like you think like, oh, what would be the hardest week out there? Well, like, explosive and necrotic or something. It can't be that way. That's the 2 level 7 affixes. So we're gonna go down the list. Cop's gonna introduce the affix, and he's gonna tell me what he thinks about it, what he knows about it, what he thinks is kind of easy or hard, and then I'm gonna give any elaboration that I feel like he might learn from. So good.
Okay, so the first one we've got here is bolstering, and that's when one of the non-boss mobs dies. It makes the other mobs around it harder. And I feel like it's one of those things that's really important to, especially if there's a big pull. As a DPS, I need to make sure everything is dying evenly so that they all kind of die at the same time.
Yeah, that's great advice. That's absolutely the number one thing you want to do with bolstering. Basically, exactly as he said, when a mob dies, it makes the other one stronger, increases their damage and health. The health is kind of the biggest part, so that's why you really want to make sure they all die at the same time. So what's your experience with bolstering? Do you have any big memories or anything that you could think of experience-wise?
Not really. It's not something I've noticed a lot of, but I have always really had good tanks that have kind of helped to keep the pulls an appropriate size, so it's never been something we've been super worried about.
Yeah, the big thing about bolstering is that you really don't want to chain pull. That's like the death of bolstering. If you even a single mob chain pull into a next pack, that just makes the pack like 10% longer, right? So there's no value in that. And the biggest mistake is bosses. If you ever accidentally pull trash with a boss, just wipe or reset the boss, because that's gonna make the boss way. I mean, that is not a good idea.
For sure, for sure. Okay. The next one we've got here is one that I don't know a lot about, and that's Grievous. And honestly, I think any information just flew out of my head.
Grievous is next.
Yeah, because Grievous. Oh, we're not. Are we going up or down, or up or
Oh,
left?
I'm on the level 4
Oh,
fixes.
okay, so you want to go up and down, not left to right. Okay, so raging is next.
Yeah.
My apologies. It's been a hard day. Uh, raging is when the non-boss mobs will get to about about 30% health. They kind of like enrage, and I believe it can be soothed by hunters and druids. And I don't
That's
really
exactly correct. Yep.
they don't really have I don't really have a lot of memories about it, or I remember seeing it, but again, I haven't really had a lot of hunters or druids in my group, so it's not something that's kind of been in the front of my head. So I haven't really had any big losses to it.
Okay, so I think a good approach to this for the rest of this is like, if it was raging week, what do you think? Like, what do you think would happen? Like, would you approach a dungeon? Is there anything that you think might be important or that you might note about a raging week?
I would ensure that in any group I was running, I would bring a druid or a hunter to soothe the mobs, or both. I would think it's also very important that if I have say medium cooldowns that I'm using on every pull, I'm saving them for when the mobs get low.
Okay. Yeah. So it's actually raging currently when we're recording this. So this one's fresh in my head. And probably the biggest thing about raging is that it can really overwhelm you if you're not ready for it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's two different ways it can overwhelm you. Number one is that you might be fighting a very, very dangerous singular mob. And when that mob enrages, he could easily wipe you. There's a couple great examples of this. King's Rest has a couple. The big one now, though, is Junkyard. There's this mob. It's like a robot-looking tank thing. And it does an AoE damage that is a very long cast, about like a 3-second channel of AoE damage. And we had that happen the other night. When it channels with raging, we legitimately almost wiped. It did like 150% of our health over those 3 seconds. So we need to use extreme CDs just to survive it, because we had no way to remove it. So I would definitely agree with Cop. And if you're doing a raging group and you're not bringing something that could dispel and rage, you're really playing with fire there. No matter how good the players are, there's just not much you can do. So the biggest problem with raging is that there might be some very dangerous casts that might happen when a mob is raged. And the other thing that's kind of an underdog, sneaky little thing here is when you're fighting a pack of, say, like 5 mobs and you have very good AoE damage and they're all getting AoE down pretty evenly, and then they all go into raging at the same time. This actually had me die multiple times this week. It is definitely something to think about. It's not nothing. It's not something that you can just say, oh, I'm not concerned with this. You absolutely have to be ready. So I'd give advice that if you're tanking, you want to use defensive CDs at the end of pulls, or kite, or, like for Cop's example, he has a couple things that he could do. He could leg sweep. Once he sees all of these, maybe 5 mobs all in raging range, he could leg sweep, maybe even Ring of Peace, especially if you see the tank trying to get away from the mobs, the tank's aware of the imminent danger, throw Ring of Peace down, anything. There's a couple options for different classes, but that's probably where I would go for your class.
Yeah, it's kind of almost the opposite of bolstering, where you might want to focus a singular mob down before you go to the other ones.
Yeah, well, yeah, that could be the case. In fact, that actually isn't a bad piece of advice. Making sure that you kill the most important mob in the pack before the rest of the pack becomes dangerous, because that's basically what happens with raging. You have 5 mobs, one of them's extremely dangerous. You definitely want to focus that one down, because if that one, if they all get dangerous at the same time, and that one's already more dangerous, then you're in serious trouble there. So it's either isolate that one or kill that one first for sure.
Excellent. So next on our list is Sanguine. And if I'm not mistaken, the way this one works is when you kill a non-boss enemy, it drops a puddle on the ground that will hurt the players and heal other mobs. And my kind of experience with that is that the tank usually tries to move the pack out of the Sanguine to make it easier for the DPS so they don't stand in it.
Yeah, that's the long and short of it. It's actually looked at as one of the easiest affixes in Legion, one of the, without question, the easiest affixes. In fact, a lot of people would probably remember it being as just like a free week when it was Sanguine. And now in BFA, it's the complete opposite. I feel like it's one of the harder affixes. And it's mostly because, first of all, the areas that you fight mobs in are a lot more constricted. In almost every dungeon, there's a bad case for Sanguine. There's not a single dungeon besides Tol de Gore that really stands out as a terrible dungeon for it. But almost every dungeon has bad areas for Sanguine. Where, like, if you look back at some of the dungeons in Legion, like Atal or I'm sorry, DHT, and Halls of Valor, these dungeons had very wide open spaces, and the mobs were not very voluminous. So this expansion, I feel like some of the fixes that usually were looked at as easy last expansion are way worse. And who knows what that's going to look like in 9.0. But as of right now, Sanguine, oftentimes moving the mobs is just not enough. There's just nowhere to move.
Yeah.
Have you ever experienced that?
Yeah, Waycrest. I have distinct memories of some of those corridors in Waycrest being just toxic. There's no place for us to move without aggroing more mobs, and it's just a race to kill all of the mobs quick enough that the Sanguine doesn't kill the group.
That's a great point. Waycrest is a great example, and you said something that I probably wouldn't have thought of myself. You can't go anywhere without pulling more mobs. That's the biggest issue with this expansion's Mythic Plus Dungeons and Sanguine. Is the only place to go is back the way you came, and sometimes that's not safe either. You know what I mean? In the other, the old dungeon format, a lot of these dungeons had so much space. You'd be running 10 to 15 seconds in between some packs, so you can go in any direction, 360 degrees. Now in a dungeon like Waycrest, Tol de Gore, these hallways are so small that a single mob is going to cover the entire hallway's playable area, and you have to go directly backwards, otherwise some mobs are going to heal. And there's a lot of mobs, especially in Waycrest, that are just very difficult to move out of these things. So Sanguine's a great affix for a tank, especially who is very aware of it. Blood Death Knight, unfortunately, tier 1 number 1 for Sanguine, just because absolutely Death Grip, Gore Fiends, things like this are just completely, like, it's almost impossible. I don't know. I envy anybody who does well on Sanguine week without a Blood DK, because, man, it's just so much of pain at some weeks, though.
For sure. Okay, next one we've got is Teaming. And Teaming is where you would normally have a pack of, say, 5 mobs. Maybe you'll have that pack will have 8 in it. And not only that, but the amount of mobs you have to kill to get your count is also much higher. So your time is a lot more tight, because you have to do a lot more work in the same amount of time. That's my understanding of it.
And what do you think about Teaming? What would you do? Anything?
The biggest thing I would think about Teaming is I would do what you are kind of famous for advocating, which is keep everything on cooldown at all times. I want to maximize all my DPS at all times. I want to kind of be chain pulling, because that way we're always in combat with them. We're always killing something, and it really helps move the dungeon along. That would be kind of how I would see it. Again, still noob.
No, that's good. Yeah, so I mean, Teaming is definitely a dungeon that if you're not going to play well on trash, just don't sign up. That's absolutely the way to look at it. Even on the tyrannical Teaming weeks, which I look at as some of the easiest weeks in the game, you still need to maximize your AoE. So something I might recommend a cop is think about changing trinkets, talents, essences that are going to allow you to do more AoE easier. Not necessarily like a full focus AoE build. It's going to depend on the week, of course, but you're going to know that you're going to be fighting large voluminous trash pulls, and a couple dungeons it can be really bad in. So Teaming, the other weird thing about it is, now this, I think, I still don't really understand this, but longtime viewer of the channel, hasn't been around for a long time, Alex, he told me about this in season 2 and 3, and I think this is how it works. So we all interface with the mob count as a percentage. That's what it shows in game, and that's what we usually think about when we're thinking about, oh, we need 2% more to get to 100%. But how it works is there's actually something like an actual number that's associated with the mob too, not just a percentage, but like an actual number. So each mob, say, gives enemy forces of 3. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now that doesn't change. It's just the amount of enemy forces that you need is higher in Teaming. So the percentages will be different. And the long story short there is that you're oftentimes not going to be able to pull the same, say, 22 packs. Like if that's the normal dungeon, 22 trash packs, and then 5 bosses, 4 bosses, whatever. you're not going to be able to pull 22 packs and still have the same count that you had on a non-teaming week. So I think the TLDR here is you are not going to be able to do the exact same route on teaming weeks, and that is why you're going to need a separate route. Actually, in the route video I have, you can see I have a separate column here that has teaming only, a separate column dedicated to a single affix. So that is how important that is.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Next one I see. Oh, busting. Nice. The way I understand busting is when you kill a non-boss enemy, it explodes and does a certain amount of percentage to your health, or applies a dot of some kind to your health, something to that effect. Again, I'm not 100% on busting. I haven't had a lot of experience with it. So, again, it's going to come down to knowing your defensive cooldowns and knowing when to kill things and when not to. Is kind of how I would think of it.
Okay, and knowing what you know, what would you think about a dungeon, like for a busting week? Anything specific?
I would think you'd want to bring healers with strong cooldowns and maybe more hots than direct, big cooldowns.
Okay,
if that makes any sense.
Well, it does. The cooldown thing is definitely the biggest thing, and so the way busting works is whenever a mob dies, it applies a magic debuff to you. Now, this is actually shadow damage. I'm pretty sure it's shadow damage, and it can be AMS. So it's an affix that I often laugh at, but it is one of the harder affixes in the game because there's a lot of trash in the game that you just simply cannot ignore busting on. And a couple packs like the Sarid packs in Atal Dazar, that is just, you're going to have trouble with that no matter what. It's just, there's 6 mobs with very little health. They're all going to apply it very fast. So what you need to do here is you need to make sure you have a focused approach for the affix, one way or the other. You want to make sure that you and your healers, like your DPS and your healers, are on the same page, one way or the other. And that page should either be just light up the mobs, kill them as fast as humanly possible, change nothing about how you DPS, and make sure the healer is ready to deal with them when it's dangerous. Or you deal with them in a much more conservative way where you make sure that you do not ever accidentally kill them in a staggered way. So that might mean literally single targeting on a pack of AoE mobs at times. Like, for example, if you kill one and it applies the stack, that stack will last for a few seconds, and then if you kill another one, it will refresh the stack, right? No matter how long into the stack it is. So you could kill one, 3 seconds later, kill another one, now you have 2 stacks, kill another one, 3 seconds later, you have 3 stacks, and it just gets to be like, you now have this magic damage coming in for like 30 seconds if you do this that poorly. So you want to do the opposite of that. You want to honestly just single target mobs down, depending on the size and the type of pack. So but yeah, I would definitely say a healer that has great CDs. Like, I think Holy Paladin's tier 1 number 1 for this. You thought HOTS, and I could totally understand why you'd think that. But it's all about burst healing, because sometimes you might get 6 or some stacks of busting, and if you do, that's like, you're gonna die to that if you don't have insane burst healing. Like, HOTS are not gonna, they're not gonna help. They're not gonna outweigh the damage, the dot. You know what I mean? So for me, I would say Holy Pally. You could Devo, you could Wings, big healing coming there. I'd say Dix Priest as well, big absorbs, put the barrier down, stuff like that. And then probably most important is Resto Shaman. Spirit Link is going to make a big deal on that, mostly because a lot of times there's usually 1 or 2 people that are already low from the pack that you were fighting, and then if they have 6 stacks of it, they're dead for sure. So Spirit Link will help you even that out, and then of course, other CDs that Shaman have will help heal through it. So
yeah, I hadn't thought about it being a stacking debuff, so for sure.
Oh yeah, that's the reason it sucks. It's like the damage it does, a single stack, you won't even notice. Literally, if you killed 1 mob, it wouldn't even, like, you wouldn't even notice it. It's not until 3, 4, 5 stacks it starts to get noticeable, and then 6, 7, 8, that's like, oh, we are gonna die for sure. And of course, if you get 6 in a second, like there was no 1, then 2, then 3, like ladder that you're climbing, it's just 6 automatically. That's very easy to heal through. You just need CDs. But if you have 3, then 4, then 5, then 6, that's a wipe for sure. Yeah.
I think it's important in something like that I know it's happening so that I can bring Dampen Magic instead of Dampen Harm.
And I for that.
Yeah, and I can definitely use my Oh crap! I'm a monk and I completely forgot the name of my own ability. Touch of Karma. Um,
Mm.
yeah, use Touch of Karma on cooldown. Just do what I can to help the healer out. With my own healing
Yeah,
CDs.
and the big tip, Death Knights out there, AMS. It will not stop. Like, once it's on you, it won't do anything other than absorb the damage. But if you AMS before the busting stack is applied to you, it will not get applied to you. So again, the starred packs, 6 mobs, all going to die at the same time. If I notice it and react to it properly, I can avoid 6 stacks. That is huge, especially if you have a Spirit Link Resto Shaman. Absolutely massive.
Nice. Very, very nice. Okay. I think that's it for that rank.
Yeah, so that's it for level 4 affixes. Now we're on to level 7 affixes, which are commonly considered to be more volatile. So yeah, we'll start with you see necrotic there, right?
I see necrotic there, and the way I understand necrotic is very similar to busting. It's like when you kill these non-boss enemies, it's going to leave that magic debuff on you as well. And again, I don't have a lot of experience with it, so I can't really speak too much about it. But I would think a lot of this...
I don't know what that is. That's not an affix. So the way necrotic works is anytime you get a melee, a physical attack, or it doesn't even have to be physical, but anytime you take an auto attack from a creature in a dungeon, the tank or the person receiving that physical attack, it could not also be, it could be you. If you have threat or it's fixated on you for some reason, you will be getting these stacks as well. It applies used to be magic, now it is physical debuff that reduces the healing you can receive and applies a physical damage dot over time. So this effects used to be really, Blood DK used to dominate it because you'd easily be able to reset your stacks with the legendary cloak from Legion and AMS. You would use AMS with the legendary cloak, which made AMS longer, and it would reset the stacks. But now you don't have that option. It's not magic anymore. It's physical, and you have no way to reset it as everybody but Paladin, okay? Like directly. Obviously, the way most people reset it is they kite. If you're not getting auto-attacked by mobs, you cannot get necrotic, right? If you're taking no auto attacks, no necrotic stacks. And it lasts a certain period of time, like 8 seconds, whatever it is. So you need to be sure that you're dropping it at key times, because if you can get, like 7 seconds into the debuff and then it refreshes at the last second, that's really, really bad. So there's a couple dungeons, or more so bosses, that are really bad, like Gunker in Junkyard. Any bosses with more than one target are really bad. It was really bad in Legion like that. There's not a lot of bosses with more than one target in BFA, but you could think for yourself about some that might cause you problems. It's going to depend a lot on the class too. But the big tip I'd give is that dwarfs, both dark iron and regular dwarfs, they could remove it with stone skin or whatever it's called. And also the paladins, they could bubble or bop as well. So a prop paladin is really, really good for this affix, or just a holy paladin in general. But if the Holy Pally is going to bop the tank, obviously the tank needs to be ready to remove bop or be aware of it one way or the other. Now, as a monk, you actually can help severely. This is one of the best affixes to have a Windwalker or a monk in general, because you can put Ring down. Ring is just a no-fail mode. Almost every mob in the game will be affected by Ring, so it's very, very, if I ever need to kite, this was a great option to have a monk. But you don't want to just do it willy-nilly, because it's obviously not, it's something that needs to be calculated. So I think it's almost funny that Cobb knows the least about necrotic, because first of all he could have a huge impact on it, but it's basically just a tank mechanic, and this is why people think necrotic is easy, because they're like, oh, I DPS, bro, I don't care about tanking. But in reality, this could be the hardest to fix in the game, because if the tank cannot do what he wants pack to pack to pack, then you are really slow. The dungeon's going very slow.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I always see my role as a DPS as making the tank and healer's life easier. So
yeah, fair enough.
It's definitely something I need to be aware of. And as a tank only, quote unquote tank only affix, it's not something I've really thought about before. But I wonder if my dampen harm would reduce the amount of damage I take from this physically, right?
Yeah, it's just a dot. It's just like a bleed, basically.
Okay, they'll probably reduce it if I ever...
You should never have it. That's the thing. Like,
yeah.
If you get more than a few stacks, something's seriously wrong.
Yeah. For sure. Okay, so what do we got next here? I'll go from top to bottom, might as well. Grievous. The one I screwed up earlier.
Sure, we can go that way.
I do believe this is another quote-unquote tank affix, and that's about all I know about it.
Okay, so we talked about this before the dungeon. Not a tank affix. Do you remember what we talked about?
Not in the slightest. My mind is just not working
like
today. I know. Sorry. I'm sorry.
Anyway, it's Grievous. It is a very, very, very dangerous affix. In fact, this is not the one to not know, because honestly, it's probably the hardest affix in the game, and it's really it's not easily countered. But yeah, basically, if you're below 90% health, it's stacking a debuff on you that is effectively a bleed. So it's actually quite similar to necrotic in that way that it's bopped off, or an immunity will remove it. It will stack only in combat. So if you're under 90% and you're not in combat, it will not. It will continue to stay on you if you had it while you were in combat, but it will not stack further. So that's, you want to catch up there. You could do things like put a sugar crusted fish feast down. Use mage food, something like this, to help your healer. This is definitely a good food if you're a good week to have food. I mean, if you're a non-healer, or especially you don't have any self heals, especially, you definitely want to have food, because otherwise you're just going to be sitting there like demanding that the healer spends 30 seconds extra to heal it off you. It does a lot of damage, and it's very dangerous. The biggest problem with Grievous is that there's a lot of unavoidable damage in some dungeons, or some bosses especially, and they actually nerfed the game so you cannot have Grievous and Tyrannical, because that's how detrimental some of these boss interactions were with Grievous. So yeah, I mean, this is a serious affix, and it's one that it's coming up again. Next week is Grievous. The previous week was Grievous. I look at those as two of the hardest weeks on the calendar. It's just because you have to rely on the healer. As a tank, I can do very little about Grievous. Yeah. But I do feel like as a Blood DK with the new health build, it's both good and bad. The more health you have, the easier it is to fall into Grievous range and have big trouble with it. But also, because of how much self-healing I do based on my health pool, I do feel like it's easier to stay at the right health range. So, I don't know. For me, I don't really care that much about Grievous, but I do recognize that it is one of the hardest affixes, and bad healer. We've seen it a lot last week. We're probably going to see it again this coming week here on stream. Wow, what a mess it is with the bad healer.
Yeah. Keep my personals on cooldown, and do what I can to help the healer out.
Yeah, just heal yourself, basically. That's the best thing you can do. Heal yourself and eat food, or bring mage food or something, whatever you can get. And just the big thing here, don't make the healer heal. Like, when you're out of combat and you're sitting there, don't make the healer first have to drink and then heal you again. While he's drinking and recovering mana from the difficult pack you just did, you need to be helping yourself, because otherwise you're just spending like 30-some seconds out of combat. You know what I mean? Yeah,
exactly. It makes the dungeon that much longer. Okay, what next we got in my list here is Explosive. Oh boy. Those are those big orange orbs that when I see them, I have to switch to them and kill them quickly, because otherwise they're going to explode and do a whole bunch of unavoidable damage to the entire group. And they spawn from it's either from enemies or from players, because I notice there are always a bunch in both melee and ranged. So that's kind of my...
You said orange, because they used to be green. I was worried that you... But yeah, anyway, they used to be called fell explosives. Now they're called explosives. But yeah, that's basically how it works. Any enemy can spawn one. The thing that... So you said, like, what did you say? The last thing, like, they could spawn blah blah blah.
I've seen them spawn both in melee and in ranged. And if you only have, like, if you're only bringing 3 melee to the dungeon, then that could be a real problem.
Now, you're insightful without meaning to be.
Okay.
Without accuracy. You're extremely correct.
Please help me.
This is one of the biggest things about Explosive, is having no ranged can be very, very detrimental. But they don't spawn randomly. Like, they don't just spawn wherever they want. The reason that they might look like they spawn in random locations is because oftentimes they seem to have maybe a little bit... Well, there's a couple reasons, but, like, there might be an object that's spawning them that you don't recognize as danger. So on this list, I actually have one of the big things about Explosive is that there could be a situation where you might have way too much dedication to the actual pack, and people are just not paying attention to it. So a pack that has many interrupts, this is the death of your group, because when you have 4 or 5 targets that need 4 or 5 interrupts, then that means nobody is thinking about switching to explosives. So on the chance where, like, this happens in Motherload all the time, the mob runs, he kind of like the little oof, like, or what do they call them? Those like ogres.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Those little.
It's like a WoW. It's like a goblin thing. But
Yeah.
anyway, he like charges to the player. Okay, he charges to the player. He's one of the easiest mobs in that area. So people just, oh, he's over there. Who cares? Just keep AOEing. But now he's back there for a few seconds, and an explosive spawns. But meanwhile, you're fighting the pack. It's got 3 or 4 mobs that need to be interrupted, stunned, death gripped, etc. That explosive is not getting touched if they're melee. No chance at all that's going off 100% of the time. It's either on the healer or the tank or any ranged. Okay, so I have to say, explosive, you really want to have some ranged DPS. In fact, I would say some dungeons like Cetralis, the last boss in Cetralis, you have 4 targets that are fixed in location, all very far apart. You really need range for this, because if you have 4, 3 melee and a tank, then you basically have to say 1 person at each of the mobs. Otherwise, there's no chance that you're going to be able to get explosives when they spawn in random spots. So, and then there's some other odd interactions, like say on a junkyard. We noticed this last night. The robot in like the last boss. There's the robot on the ground, and then there's the flying machine that is actually the boss. That can spawn explosives from it, even though it's not attackable. It's immune, and it's flying like 100 yards above you. It is still able to spawn explosives. So, for example, we killed like the first phase of the fight, and then we went up the ramp. And while we were going up the ramp, a random ass explosive just spawned in the middle of nowhere, because that came from that mob. So
Wow.
these are the kind of, like, you need some range. Either the healer has to deal with it, or a ranged DPS has to deal with it. Obviously, you're not going to have a freaking demon hunter go flipping backflips across the world to get it. It's just not going to happen. So it's a relatively easy fix. I think it's a tank fix, frankly. For me, I feel like it is the tank's job, and I'm going to tell you why. Because if a melee DPS switches and they use 1 global on it, they might overkill it by, say, 20 to 30%. But if a tank switches and uses 1 global on it, they might just kill it. 1 global and an auto attack, for me, the levels I've been doing, usually a death strike and an auto attack, that's definitely enough. But if a rogue or a monk, they switch, they're using a global on it, that's like potentially, that could be like 100,000 DPS lost. You know what I mean? So, or damage loss. So like, you really want to be careful with wasting damage on them. If all 3 DPS switch and they all put 1 global into them and overkill them by like 1 million, really bad.
Yeah, for sure. I can definitely see that. I always tried to switch just because I never know if anybody else is noticing them, or if everybody's focusing so hard, but I can definitely see your point about that being a tank.
Yeah, but that being said, like, Windwalker's really good for it. Rogue's really good for it. Outlaw Rogue especially, because they can cleave off it. Demon Hunter's really good for it, because they basically have like an ability that's easily spammable that will probably hit it for almost 100% of its health. But yeah, healers are really good for it. Holy Pally might be the best class in the game. If you watch my Holy Pally stream during Explosive Week, you will see I was easily #1 on most groups on Explosive, and I am terrible at my Paladin. So a really good Holy Paladin, throw a Judgment, throw a Holy Shock, it can easily kill those things without much effort.
Yeah. Now, wasn't there something, I recall in the back of my brain, and again, I could be completely mistaken, but there was some problem with tab targeting to explosives.
Yeah, so there was actually a bug, and I don't want to go too far into it, not within the scope of the video, but yeah, basically a bug that made it so explosives, it didn't work with the obelisk, so they needed to make it so explosives were in combat until you dealt damage to them. And I don't think it was intended to do that, but that's what happened. So you cannot tab to a target you're not in combat with, or at least you're not supposed to be able to. People report problems with this all the time, but you're not supposed to be able to tab to something you're not in combat with. So technically those explosives would not, also, like, some nameplates won't show mobs that you're not in combat with, even if they're right next to you. So, like, yeah, people were reporting all these issues. They fixed that, problem solved. You can easily tab to them. I should also mention, you cannot macro, you cannot / target explosive. That does not work. You need to either tab to them or target their health bar. Frankly, I would recommend targeting their health bar. Tabbing is just way too unreliable if you have a big pack, and that's when it's going to be really hard. You're fighting 5 mobs, you do not have the luxury of tab, 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 tab. Oh, I got it. It's exploded by then.
Yeah. I just thought I'd ask because that stuck in my head about those, so I figured I would ask.
Yeah. That was only a couple weeks ago. That was just fixed now.
Oh, good. Let's see. Next one we've got here on my list is Volcanic. And Volcanic, I believe, I'm not sure exactly how they spawn because I keep running over them. But they're essentially little volcanoes that pop up on the ground. And I often don't see them. And I often run over them because I'm concentrating on the mobs so much. And really, they should be easy to avoid, I guess.
This is the easiest affix in the game for sure. Not even question. There's no question. There's no second. Like, it's not even a second thought. Volcanic is the easiest affix in the game because it only spawns at range. So there are some situations where Volcanic might be dangerous. Like, for example, on a fight with ads or things that are actually attackable that you don't normally think are dangerous. This can kind of, like, the best example I can give, and this doesn't happen because they attuned it, but like the best example I can give would be the last boss of Underrot. It can still wipe you, honestly. One of the easiest dungeons in the game can still be dangerous on Volcanic because those dozens and dozens of gray orbs that come from the puddles, they can spawn Volcanic to the point where you might have 10 to 15 of those Volcanic spawns at once. And if you get hit by any of them, you're probably getting hit by multiple of them. So it can still be a difficult thing. Like, it could be a lot worse. I think they just tuned it down because there could be like 100 of those orbs up. If they all spawned a volcano at the same time, the whole room would be covered. But yeah, it only spawns at range. So if you're soloing, Volcanic is the weak for it. Like, not that anybody is, but if you have 5 melee, everybody in melee range, the affix literally does not happen. It can only happen if a player is out of range of the target, not if they're a range damage dealer, if they're out of range of it. So even if you have mages, etc., they could be standing right next to the mob, they will never have to move from Volcanic. But they change it. It's so easy now compared to how it was in Legion. In Legion, it used to always spawn directly underneath the character. Now it can spawn within a few yards of the character. So there's times where you literally don't even have to move from it. It spawns next to you, and you don't actually have to move.
Gotcha. I guess it's one of those things where I just am not used to seeing it, so I hadn't noticed it, and I'd run over it a few times, and yeah. I feel bad about it.
For you to be getting hit by it as a melee is like, either something's wrong with the mob's position or yours. And I'm going to blame the mob's position because I like you.
Okay, appreciate that, buddy.
Yeah, but okay, it's fine.
I remember running over it as we're moving to the next pack. So, like...
Okay, that's fair enough. Yeah, that could happen, I'm sure.
Yeah. Okay, next one. Skittish. And I believe that this is, again, kind of a tank affix, in that it basically reduces the amount of attention that mobs will pay to threat tables. So that you have to have much more threat to keep their attention. Again, I'm not tank, I'm not 100% certain on how it works. It's never seemed to affect me in any way.
That's correct. Yeah, Skittish is just a 75% threat reduction to anybody who is listed as a tank. So it doesn't have anything to do with anything else. If you are a tank, you're doing 75%. Or that number doesn't sound right to me, but that's what I've heard people say. I never actually pay attention. Either way, you do a lot less threat, considerably less threat on Skittish Week, and it's also one of the easiest affixes. Volcanic is definitely the easiest, but Skittish could easily be the second easiest for sure, just because you have things like Twilight Devastation. Really, the best way to counter this is just get a couple globals in before the DPS do. So maybe the hardest part about Skittish is if you have a slow, non-confident tank who's taking too long to commit to a pack, and then the Demon Hunter's like charges in there and just pops everything, he's gonna pull threat. There's no way you could stop that.
Yeah.
Unless you. And there's also now an essence that will taunt mobs for you, AoE taunt mobs.
Oh,
so
wow.
Yeah, Skittish is looking really easy this season. And maybe other than on the obelisks, it really shouldn't ever cause any problems. Sometimes when you're kiting, the big problem with Skittish is that you might not have established threat enough to start the kite. And if that's the case, the DPS are almost assuredly going to pull threat. So you just got to be ready to taunt back. But, you know, something that maybe a lot of tanks don't realize, taunt actually applies a it's like a threat modifier for a few seconds. So when you taunt, you then do like a bunch of percent extra threat. So really all you have to do if you're fighting a single mob and you're worried about losing threat, taunt and get 2 good globals in, and you're good on Skittish. It's just usually on AoE. Like if you don't have Twilight Devastation or big AoE, you're probably going to have some threat problems. But you can just bring a rogue, makes it a lot easier.
So if I'm on a skittish week and I have a tank that I know is new to tanking, maybe a little less competent, maybe I fall back to what I used to do back in BC and Wrath, where there was that 2 to 3 second rule, where you wait for the tank to a couple of seconds before you started in with your own DPS.
Yeah, the like ratio right now, unless you have like big procs or crazy outliers, the way it seems to work for me is I usually do about 3 times less AoE damage over the course of an entire pack than the damage dealers might do. So if the damage dealer is going to do like 150k AoE to this pack, I'm probably going to do 50. And that, again, that's just on average. That seems to be what it looks like, okay? So what I need to do is I need to get 3 globals in before he gets 1. That's all you have to do. So either the damage dealer could wait 2 seconds or the tank could get there faster than the damage dealer. That's what I try to do. On Skittish Week, I just get there first, blood boil twice, and I'm good. As long as I get 2 blood boils in before the Demon Hunter pops I-beam, I got threat.
Good. Okay. Yeah, so that's a good idea then. It's just to watch how the tank's working.
Just wait 1 or 2 globals and you'll
1 or 2
be
globals
fine.
and be good. Yeah. Good. Okay, and the last one that we have is quacking. Oh, this is a cool one because they just changed this, and I actually know that they just changed this for this season.
This is the biggest change that they've ever made to Affix.
Oh, it's so nice because it used to be. Yep. I won't even go into what it used to be. The way that quacking works is every so often you'll get a big brown-gray circle underneath every single player in the group, and if you are standing inside of somebody else's circle, you will take like 20% of your health and damage for every other circle that you're standing in besides your own. And if you're only standing in your own circle, you take no damage. There's nothing to it.
Yeah. So it used to be 10% no matter what, and then it would stack up. Now it does no damage to you if you're the only person in it, and it does twice as much damage per player if you're more people are stacked. So this is now one of the easiest affixes if you build around it, and it's still one of the hardest affixes if you don't. If at any point you have 2 idiot melees running around in circles and you're the tank, you're going to have a bad time. This is a really, really hard affix with that scenario unfolding. And it can be mitigated. It's a physical damage hit. But as Blood DK, it does not count as Death Strike healing. It does not go into Death Strike. It is it's considered an environmental hit, so that does not count for Death Strike healing. I assume it's the same for other specs classes like Vengeance that have similar abilities. But yeah, like a warrior could ignore pain. They could reduce it with armor, stuff like that, I assume. So I don't actually know, what's the best way to mitigate it other than just spread out. Literally, that's it now. It used to be so, like, if you looked at a dungeon in Season 3 with quacking, it would be your top damage. It'd probably do like 40% of the damage the dungeon provided. Literally, just an affix. So that was ridiculously difficult, and now it is so much more comfortable. Just bring a couple range, and you're all set. Holy Pally's kind of weak this week, fortunately, but other than that, bring a couple range.
Yeah, and like I say, you have to be standing inside the other person's circle. You can overlap circles, but as long as you're not standing inside their circle, you will not get hurt from it. That's my understanding.
Yep, yeah, if you're standing in it, you get hit really hard. If you're not standing in it, it doesn't happen at all. But it also interrupts spell casting. That should be obvious. If you're a caster, I say bring range, but you still have to be aware of it. It's not just nothing. If you are casting a spell when the quack happens, you will be turned into a duck, and you will not be able to cast. No, I'm just kidding, but obviously, memes aside, you will not be able to cast for a few seconds. So occasionally I have this trouble. This happened a couple weeks ago when we watched Cyclo's video. He freaking took Cyclo into a Waycrest Manor with quacking and used it and got quacked while he was channeling Cyclo, so he wasted the Cyclo.
Poor size.
Hey, that's life, man.
Now, it used to interrupt people who tried to eat as well, and I don't think it does anymore. If you're
right, that only used to happen because you took damage. Now you take no damage, so you could eat during it.
Ah, good.
Yeah.
So that's
you can mount during it. These things like things that usually get interrupted if you take damage. You don't take damage anymore unless you're stacking on somebody. So yeah, you could mount up, you could eat, you could do whatever. I don't know what other options there are, but yeah, those are whatever. Those are better now.
Good, good, good. And I think those are all the.
That's all of them.
That's all of them.
Yep, that's all the affixes. There's still the level 2 affixes. I'm just going to briefly touch on them.
Sure.
Fortified, I mean, it should be very obvious. Fortified, trash is hard. Tyrannical, bosses are hard. In my opinion, Fortified is a lot more pug friendly. It's the affix you want to see if you're just wanting to get a lot of keys done, because it's a lot less likely that you're going to lose a key over trash. You might wipe to trash, but generally if there's 5 mobs, you're probably going to have killed 2 or 3 before you wipe, so then next time you come back it's a little bit easier, whatever, you keep going. But on Tyrannical, the likelihood that you are spending 3 to 4 minutes on a boss and then wipe somewhere in between it, that's death. Like, the key is done, you know what I mean? If you lose somebody to a boss on a Tyrannical week, expect that dungeon to now be in serious trouble. But you lose somebody to trash on Fortified week, they just run back. You know what I mean? So for me, I definitely dislike Tyrannical because of that. There's a lot of weeks of Tyrannical that are actually really easy compared to some Fortified weeks. And there's a lot of dungeons that definitely work better on Tyrannical than they do on Fortified. But for me, I still prefer Fortified at all costs. So one last thing we want to talk about here today. We're going to scroll down. Cop, you've been reading from this the whole time. But I have the weekly affix list, okay? Yeah. We're going to go through every single week. I'm going to give a very quick commentary on it, and I'm going to ask Cop to do the same. And I'll tell you a little bit about what I think about the difficulty of the week, okay? So this is nothing, like, this is just like an arbitrary back and forth list. Like, it doesn't mean that week 1 of the season is always week 1 of the list. In fact, that's not how it works at all. It never goes out of order. I don't think they've ever gone out of order. They have changed what the weeks are throughout the expansions and the seasons, but they've never gone out of order. It's always been exactly what it's supposed to be, to my knowledge. So it's never going to be Fortified 2 weeks in a row, one way or the other. Like, they've never done that. That's something that you could always count on. Okay, so anyway, the first week on the list, Fortified bolstering Grievous. What do you think about that week?
Really important to bring your, as we said with bolstering, we want to make sure that the enemies are all dying at the same time, so we want to be doing our heavy AoE, but at the same time we want to be keeping our health above 90% as much as possible and helping our healers out. So, and with it being fortified, that's going to mean that the non-boss enemies are going to be that much harder. That's going to be a hard week.
Writing's on the wall there, right? Hardest week in my opinion. 100% hardest week. Even though I say Fortified is more fun and more approachable, last week it was this week, and it was really, really, really tough. Mostly because Grievous is extremely difficult on bad healers, but also because bolstering just adds a ton of time to the run. And most notably, the absolute worst dungeon for this week is Siege of Borealis. 1, because there is a ton of unavoidable damage in the dungeon. A ton. The last boss especially. One of the hardest bosses for Grievous out there. And of course, bolstering is a nightmare in this dungeon. We talked about it probably for 30 minutes out of the 1-hour video when we made the Siege video. It is such a nightmare in there. Almost every pack has really small mobs and then one really big dangerous mob. Almost every pack in the whole dungeon's like this. So yeah, it's not fun at all. And man, is that dungeon just stuck for that week. That's definitely the hardest dungeon for the hardest week out there. So that's that week. Next week we got Tyrannical Raging Explosive. That's actually this week. So what do you think?
That's not that bad, because as much as you don't like the Tyrannical as opposed to the Fortified, if you've got a good coordinated group, you can really deal with the explosives and the ragings pretty easily, and you can approach the bosses a lot nicer. But for a pug group, I could see where that would be horrible. Because
so this is a week that heavily complements a coordinated group. If you have multiple dispels of enrages, druids and hunters, this is a very, very beneficial week to have that. And using it well is going to be very important. And then, of course, explosive. If you have people who are selling out, committing to dealing with explosive, it's going to be pretty good. But still, it's one of the harder weeks, because if you don't have those things, you're just done. I mean, some of these packs are literally impossible. When they rage, they just kill the tank 100% of the time. And then, of course, explosive has a lot of problems in some dungeons. Like Tempest Athralis is really difficult with explosive in a lot of ways. And of course, the big problem is you're doing damage to explosive. That means you're not doing damage to mobs. They cannot be AoE'd, etc. So it's a lot of wasted damage. A lot of people look at bolstering and explosive as some of the hardest weeks to time, and that may be true. It's not always what I focus on when I'm talking about dungeons, but I still have this as a hard week. But next up, we have Fortified, Sanguine, and Grievous. Now that's next week. What do you think of that?
Oh, that's horrible because your non-boss enemies, your trash is harder. It's going to be dropping Sanguine, which is going to make you slip into Grievous a lot more. Man, that's just going to be horrible for a healer. I would want to be a healer on that week.
You'd be surprised at how much damage people take from Sanguine. We looked at it back in Season 1 and 2 a lot, and even though it looks like Sanguine's being handled well, people are taking a lot of damage from it. In fact, I remember one very specific dungeon. It was an Underrot during Sanguine Grievous, and the top damage taken on the dungeon was Grievous, and the second was Sanguine. So
Wow.
yeah, it's kind of crazy because Sanguine is 100% avoidable from damage taken point of view, not always 100% avoidable from the healing. But yeah, if you take damage from Sanguine in a Grievous week, you are in serious trouble. So I have this as one of the hardest weeks, and certainly one that I don't look forward to because you cannot rely on a good healer, man. They just really don't exist some weeks, and this is one of them. So I'd say one of the worst dungeons for this week is Tol de Gore because very, very small hallways and a lot of really small, like just terrible pieces of trash that are going to cause problems for pretty much the whole hallway to come. So that's the third week. Next up, we have Tyrannical, Teeming, Volcanic. Now, what do you think of that week?
I love it. Like as the way you explain Volcanic, it's not an affix, essentially, because you never get hit by it. Teeming, it's an AoE fest, so it can pad a lot. Tyrannical, bosses are harder. I'll take that.
Yeah, honestly, it looks that I should maybe have graded this the easiest week. This might easily be the easiest week. And it's because none of the affixes do anything. A good week is a week where the affixes do not complement each other well. So the previous week, Sanguine, Grievous, they complement each other extremely well. They make it a lot harder. Both affixes hurt each other. This one, Teeming has nothing to do with Tyrannical or Volcanic, and Volcanic has nothing to do with every boss minus the last boss in Underrot on Tyrannical. It just doesn't do anything. You know what I mean? There's no danger from Volcanic and Tyrannical. There's no danger from Teeming and Tyrannical, and there's almost no danger from Teeming and Volcanic. So easily one of the easiest weeks. I look at this as, even though it's an easy week, there is still one dungeon that I really dislike doing on this week, and it is a Tal Dazar. And that is because Teeming is seemingly, well, it's not purely random, but there's basically 3 packs that could be teamed. Like only one of them will be teamed. And there's 2 or 3 really, really dangerous packs in there anyway, regardless, every teaming week. So that dungeon has really not aged well, this expansion. Mm-hmm. It's only gotten harder every season. And I think at the hardest it could possibly be is a teaming week. So that's that. That's number 4. Number 5, we got Fortified, Bolstering, Skittish. What do you think?
Ouch. Your trash is harder. And it's going. If you don't do it right, it's going to start bolstering each other, and it's going to start running. So you could bolster into other packs. I don't know. That's gonna take a lot of control. But if you've got the control and you're doing it well, it could be easy, I suppose.
Now, I have this week as easy, which would be like a good week. It's not one of the easiest weeks. I rank it easy. And that's because Skittish is basically not an affix under the right circumstances. But Cop is right. If you are not in those circumstances, this can actually be a very difficult week. Fortified and Bolstering is definitely not an easy combination. But again, if you handle it well, it is. So the thing is that Bolstering always slows you down. No matter what, it will always slow you down. I don't think that's even something that they can nerf at this point. It's just always going to slow you down because you cannot pull giant packs together like a lot of people try to do. But Skittish is basically not an affix. Anytime we see Skittish or Volcanic, I look at that as an easy week. So even though Bolstering and Fortified are not a good combo, and again you see Siege of Brawls as the worst dungeon this week, it is Skittish as well. So it's basically the best, worst week. So next up we have Tyrannical, Busting, and Necrotic. Now what do you think of that week?
I think I wouldn't want to be a tank on that week. because you got necrotic, which should, as we talked about, should really only affect the tank a lot. You've got busting, which means every mob that dies is going to explode. We've got tyrannical, which as a tank you hate, because the bosses are always going to be harder. It just looks like they all just do really bad stuff together.
Yeah, now I have this week as very hard because necrotic and tyrannical is very bad. Like, this is really bad. Anytime it's tyrannical necrotic, you have to be very, very sure that you are not going to die to a boss like Gunker, or a boss that is going to be very difficult to reset stacks on. And this might mean playing your class entirely differently. Busting doesn't really come that into play, but it does synergize pretty poorly with necrotic, because obviously the time when you have the most necrotic typically is the end of the pack when mobs are dying. So you might have like a bunch of necrotic stacks and then be low health, and then busting happens and you might die to it. But really, it's only really very hard for me. For everybody else in the game, probably most people don't even care about this week. But for me, in my opinion, very hard. So, and then I have King's Rest as one of the hardest dungeons this week, because the last boss especially is very difficult on necrotic. He does a ton of damage. As Blood DK, I rely on my self-healing to survive. I do not have any actual mitigation for that week very well, so I need to Death Strike. And if I have multiple stacks of necrotic, because the raptors are also auto-attacking me, one of the worst bosses for this, for sure, this can be an incredibly difficult final boss, to the point where I might have to change, like I said, everything about how I'm playing my class just to survive on that one boss. But anyway, next up we have Fortified Sanguine Quacking. What do you think?
I like it. If you're doing stuff right, I mean, Sanguine and Fortified could interact, I suppose, because the trash mobs are harder. But if you've got a tank that's able to move the trash well, it really shouldn't be that difficult, because, as we've talked, you should be able to pretty much neutralize Quacking like 90% of the time just by where you're standing, and Sanguine's the same thing. So, it doesn't seem that horrible.
Yeah, I kind of agree. It used to be probably one of the hardest weeks in the expansion. Sanguine's still a pain, but Fortified Sanguine, that's, I mean, that's what you want. You obviously, if there was like, an easy trash week, Sanguine would make it harder. But like a week where the mobs have more health, this can actually be a good thing, because as long as you're dealing with Sanguine properly, they won't all just die by accident. Like, that happens every once in a while. So this is actually a great week for Purification Protocol. One-shotting a mob will not drop Sanguine, and it can make a big deal. But yeah, now with Quacking, I think it's one of the easier fixes, because you're constantly moving anyway, so you're a little bit more inclined to deal with Quacking well. Like, especially if you have to spread out, melee are not going to just be standing and Sanguine, so they're going to be kind of spreading naturally. So I think this is a really easy week. I have it as one of the 2 easy weeks, so I look at this week as a good one. After that, we have Tyrannical Bolstering Explosive. Let me hear your thoughts.
Tyrannical, I'm worried about Explosive and Tyrannical, because the bosses are taking longer to die, so you're going to have more explosives to deal with, and the longer that goes on, the sloppier DPS are likely to get with it. As long as the explosives don't bolster the other mobs, that shouldn't be a huge deal. So
they do not.
That's not. It's I wouldn't call it very hard, but it's. I don't see it as being easy. I see it as being like kind of challenging.
Yeah. Again, bolstering is one of the worst affixes, and it's because it slows you down in every way, and explosive can also be one of the worst affixes for that same thing. So if you're dealing with bolstering and explosive, this is a week that a lot of people look at as one of the worst weeks for key timing overall, and I could totally understand why, because basically the dungeon is just going to take like so many % longer no matter what you do, no matter how well you play. But honestly, these affixes don't really interact with Tyrannical, which I think is usually the key problem with pushing on this week. So yeah, as long as people kill explosives, Tyrannical is not going to come into play for either of these affixes. And I say that is only a hard affix, because it's still going to be difficult. Obviously, a lot of time wasted. And again, Siege of Bralis, no matter what, Tyrannical, Fortified, I don't care. I don't care what week it is. It sucks. Bolstering in there is absolutely retarded. So anyway, next up we got Fortified Busting Volcanic. Let me hear your thoughts.
Well, as we said before, Volcanic shouldn't even affect you. I kind of like Fortified with Busting, because the mobs are going to take longer to die, so you kind of have more control over when they die. You're not going to accidentally kill 3 all at once, type of thing. So I kind of like the way those two would interact. I think that's a good
Yeah,
week.
I said it before. The previous one, the previous push week I have listed was the easiest week, but this one might honestly be the easiest week. And it's because of exactly like Cop said. The only danger is just don't get killed by busting. Fortified I already look at as easier than Tyrannical. And if the mobs have more health, it's a lot easier to not mess it up by accident. So it kind of makes busting slightly easier. And then Volcanic, I'm telling you, it's Volcanic week. Those are the 2 easiest weeks, one or the other. It's just a free affix. I don't know what they could change. We talked about it. If like a volcano spawned and threw lava out at you, that would be the only way that it would be harder. But like it's just like a joke affix. I don't know. They need to change that. I think because it's just way too freaking easy. But anyway, next up we got Tyrannical Raging Necrotic. Now here.
Oh dear. Yeah, non-boss enemies are gonna enrage. That's never good. You got the necrotic. Oh man, no. I'll just let my key downgrade by a thing rather than play with that. No. No.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, it's definitely one of my least favorite weeks. I just dislike necrotic no matter what. It's not one of my favorite weeks out there, but yeah, Tyrannical Necrotic always going to be hard. There's going to be some bosses that you literally you're going to get destroyed on, and Necrotic's going to make it even harder. So Raging. The good thing about it is Raging and Necrotic, they don't really synergize that poorly. Usually the time that you would want to kite for Necrotic would be the same time that you want to kite for Raging. So it kind of actually works out. Like you could kind of do it by accident and you'd be all right. But yeah, Tyrannical Necrotic, always going to be one of the harder weeks. Same thing for King's Rest. Having Necrotic, because you're getting hit by Raptors in King's Rest on a Dazar, is really, really bad for Blood DK. Next up, we got Fortified Teaming Quacking. What do you think?
Kind of in between. I mean, your trash is harder, and there's more of it, so the key is going to take longer no matter what you do. Quacking, not really an affix unless you screw up, so it's not going to be my favorite, but I would see it as something of a challenge. I would go in there like, yeah, I'm going to have to play my best to get this done, but it can be done.
Now, in Season 3, there was a famous Fortified Teaming Quacking week. I'll never forget it as long as I live. In Season 3, the seasonal affix rotated, and one of the hardest things was when it was the Tides Emissary, because mobs would not be interruptible. Okay, so when you have a teaming pack that is uninterruptible because of a Tides Emissary, basically there'd be a lot more Tides Emissaries that week. Mm-hmm. When you have a teaming emissary, a teaming on top of the emissary plus quacking, this week was legitimately impossible. I went from upgrading 18s to barely doing 15s in time. It was ridiculous. The hardest week that ever existed when that happened, and I don't know if it ever happened more than once. I don't know. But either way, now it's a lot easier. Quacking has been nerfed, and you're really just dealing with Fortified Teaming, which is definitely one of the hardest combos in the game for everybody. I look at Tyrannical Necrotic as one of the hardest combos, but everybody should look at Fortified Teaming as one of the hardest combos, because you got a dungeon like a Taldazar again. You are just going to get destroyed in that dungeon on a couple packs, no matter how good you are at it. And Quacking has definitely been nerfed. I think it's one of the easier fixes, so not too bad. Hard, not very hard. And then Tyrannical, busting, skittish final week of the season. What do you think?
That's not that bad. Again, I don't mind Tyrannical like a tank would. It just means I'm going to have to put in more work on the bosses than I would on another week. And then busting skittish, I don't even mind that, because it doesn't seem like they interact at all. None of them even seem to interact at all. You just got to be aware and do your best.
Yeah, again, you got the week with skittish. Always going to be looked at as one of the easiest weeks, one way or the other. It's basically not an affix, but Tyrannical and busting, no interaction. I mean, there's just no interaction here. Literally, all three of these affixes don't interact with any in any way. So, yeah, another push week. There's really 4 great weeks, and it's got Volcanic and skittish. The only thing I would say about the previous one, the Fortified Bolstering skittish week, it's just Fortified and Bolstering is kind of rough. But yeah, anytime you see skittish, mark it down on the calendar. Let's get some keys done.
Excellent.
That's pretty much it. I mean, we talked a lot longer than I thought we were going to, but hopefully this has been comprehensive. Do you have anything to add or talk about here at the last minute?
Like that I actually learned quite a bit. and it helped me to think about affixes in a different way. You know, it helped me to kind of put my mind to, okay, how am I supposed to approach this affix? Not just, okay, this affix does X, Y, Z. How am I going to approach it? What do I need to do differently? What do I need to switch in gear differently? Should I be switching around my corruption, maybe? Should I be switching around my trinkets? Yeah. That kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, there's some weeks where you literally have to play your character differently, and it's not always the case for DPS, but, you know, if you're building a group, you have to think about how you're building the group differently. Mm-hmm. Like the current week we're in, Raging, obviously you're going to want some Druids, Hunter maybe as well. If it's teaming, you definitely got to be thinking about AoE, especially if it's fortified teaming. Like, you might not even think about single target on that week. So, you know, these things do change the way you play the game. I mean, we could talk for another 5 hours about this because it's not just the week, it's the dungeon as well.
Yeah.
And that's why I wanted to list what I think the worst dungeon is. We didn't talk about it a lot, but, you know, it's there. And if you have any questions, let me know. But obviously, there's some dungeons on some weeks that are just ridiculously difficult because of, yeah, just the affixes. Like, literally, you could, like, I think Underrot's a great example. Underrot is the most affix agnostic dungeon. But if there was a week that it's going to suck, it's going to be that volcanic week there because you're going to be dealing, fortified week in there is already relatively tough. And there's a lot of mobs that busting is going to be a problem for in there. But then the last boss, I've seen people wipe to that because of volcanic. Even though that's one of the easiest dungeons, I've seen people wipe to that last boss because of volcanoes. There's just volcanoes everywhere. You're meant to stack, but then you're meant to spread at the same time. So yeah, you know, this is how affixes work. And if it wasn't for affixes, there wouldn't be Mythic Plus. Yep. The people who think like, oh, like, the reason I made this document is because there was a website that I wanted to show, but they're like extremely negative about affixes in general. And it's like, you're an idiot. Like, I hate to tell you, like, it's just stupid. It doesn't, there's no, like, you know what I mean? Affixes aren't meant to be easy. They're meant to make the dungeon different every time you do it. The problem is there's some weeks that are extremely different than other weeks. Like, you have the fortified bolstering grievous week. Obviously, that's a lot freaking easier than tyrannical teaming volcanic. Like, 3 affixes that are just jokes compared to the other 3, you know? So it's like, that's the big problem right now. And I don't know if they could fix that, but that's how affixes work. So if you have any questions, let us know, huh?
Absolutely. Like, I just gotta add on, if it wasn't for affixes, they'd still be called challenge modes, because that's all it would be.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, basically. Like, you could look back at challenge modes. There was very different approach to how they worked, but you could tell that without affixes, people did the dungeon the exact same way every single pull, and maybe people prefer that. I don't think the game prefers that. I do think this is a good system, so.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll see what it looks like at 9.0. We'll get back together on that. Probably in the alpha, maybe they'll have some big changes. We could sit down and talk about it. You could tell me what you think, you know, how the affixes might be changing.
Absolutely. I look forward to it, buddy. All right.
All right, sweet. We'll see you guys in the next one.
Peace. Cop out.